Good morning, students. Are you able to hear? Yes, no?
Yes, sir.
Okay, are you able to see the
Yes,
slide?
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, today we'll be talking on neural basis of language. You know that language is a code, and what it does is it represents ideas of the world. What we use are words that are used to represent real objects. And of course, language is shared by community. So systematically constructed is the language. There are rules and regulations for how the code is arranged. This arrangement makes it predictable and learnable. So many people learn languages. So these are mostly arbitrary symbols which have been generated to construct a language. For example, you take say goat, G-O-A-T, goat, and it's a word. It does not convey anything else, like onomatopoeia, that is budge me sound, but goat doesn't. So depends on how we use this. And again, the sentences differ. The topics are same, but new sentences are constructed. That means languages are generative of sentences. And also language is dynamic. It changes with time. And as you know that old English has become modern English. There are some universal characteristics of language. All the languages have nouns, verbs, objectives, adjectives, and most of them are all sentences constructs. So if you look at the language, whenever we study language, we address three basic components: content, form, of course, and use of the language. So with these introductions, we have in the previous class learned about dysarthria, and here we are going to talk mostly about language, but we'll touch briefly motor control also, because motor control is essential for speech generation. For other actions like knee jerks and running and other things, they are stretch reflex based, but speech and swallowing, they are controlled in a different way. There are two essential components of these two skilled motor controls mechanisms. One is a feedback and correction. In living organisms, feedback for motor function takes the form of information from multiple sensors. What are these sensors? We're going to see in coming slides. So when we reach an object, muscles are contracted, and information about the position of joints, the tension of the muscle, the rate of contraction, which is rapidly conveyed, and it is continuously monitored by cerebellum for integration with other important sensory organ, vestibular nerve, vestibular input, and also it has to integrate with the motor plan that is inside the brain. What cerebellum does, it compares the planned motor act with ongoing reality, and it makes rapid ongoing changes to the plan to correct for errors in the process. Our nervous system continuously compares the state of the sensors with motor plans and corrects the plan to meet the reality of the action itself. So it is, you can see what all things that can happen in the video, which I'm going to show. See, there is a feedback mechanism: active contraction, passive stretching. Feedback goes to the brain to adjust through the cerebellum what is the trajectory, what is the speed, what is it is required to. So same thing is applied to the tongue also. Tongue also had to be controlled. So the auditory, visual inputs, sensory inputs, the prefrontal cortex, all are important in major types of control systems. Last time also we read this closed loop and open motor control systems. In a closed loop system, there is a set reference or a target, and the correction comes from comparing accuracy in hitting the target with the standard one, which is already there. This is the feedback and correction system. One of the limitations of this closed loop system is that it takes a great deal of time to integrate sensory information with the motor act. So they do not work for rapid movements, these closed loop systems in the body, because the movements are faster than the integration and correction process of the nervous system. But they are important for learning a movement. That's how over the course of our growth from the infant, we keep on learning, because of closed loop systems, and the various plans are stored in the brain. Open loop system, loopless, don't operate on sensory feedback, and the how the correction are done is by feed forward process. The correction of an open loop system can't depend on a sensory feedback mechanism, because the motor act has been completed before the sensory stimuli can be analyzed and compared with a model. So how does it work then? But these two mechanisms work together in the motor act. In learning a new task, closed loop feedback is used and correction applied to gain the skill required. Once the limits of the system, once reached, known, the closed loop control shifts to open loop system. That's the important aspect. So now there is a question of motor learning, and it requires slow movement. And the speech also, how the speech is developed in the child, or it can be a voluntary movement. Skilled execution can occur at a much faster pace when the learning takes place. These feed-forward processes combine the current state of the system with a motor program that already accounts for the knowledge. These are the memories of how it will turn. It is, and will be tried again. Speaking is even more complex. We must first have an idea or a concept that what we want to convey. That is often generated in the prefrontal cortex, say Bradman area 6, and the concept must be encoded into language by our linguistic system. That's important. Then grammatical encoding occurs, because language has rules and regulations which are largely within the Broca's area. Hello. मैं अभी नहीं बात कर सकता हूँ. We must first have an idea. Grammatical encoding occurs largely within Broca's area, while phonetic encoding occurs within the left insular cortex and left supramarginal regions. So these are the grammatical encoding is very important. The construction of a sentence, how you correctly convey in the language, that's very, very important aspect. Let us see how all these mechanisms are integrated. So the loops are there. The motor speech component, the motor acts for speech are controlled by the loops. There are two distinct loops involved in the motor act for speech. The preparative loop includes the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, where the idea is generated, anterior insular cortex, supplementary motor area, and the superior cerebellum. This is the preparative loop, and what executes is made up of the motor cortex, the thalamus, the putamen, the caudate, and the inferior cerebellum. So these two will ultimately give a signal to the anterior horn cell, the final pathway of the tongue. So you can see, and then the speech is generated. So the language production is very, very complex. You can see that from the supplementary motor area. You can see in cartoon how the various mechanisms are integrated in this. Okay, so introduction, let's look at the two major models that have been proposed to explain the production of speech: the psycholinguistic view and the motor. The psycholinguistic view sees speech as quite literally the oral manifestation of language. The motor view relates to how the manifestation occurs. To understand aphasias and all, these are very important. Hickok proposed a model that integrates these two approaches. He called it hierarchical state feedback control model. What it does, this model, is it recognizes the hierarchical nature of speech production concept or idea that triggers a verbal manifestation, that is the lemma. You can see this diagram, it is familiar and very important diagram for all of you to understand. Is the lemma, the motor programs which are in Broca's area, and syllable programs also, Broca's area 44 and left insula. This is the inferior frontal gyrus. This is a prefrontal cortex. And what it does is vocal tract output mechanisms, respiration, phonation, articulation are also active. Then there's acoustic output, that is a speech, auditory syllables and targets, which are in the superior temporal gyrus and sulcus, and they coordinate and at the Broca's temporoparietal junction coordinate the information. This is called forward prediction. This is called the somatic phoneme targets. So that is marginal gyrus and Broca's area 1 in the parietal lobe. They also coordinate, transform, and the whatever the cerebellum is monitoring. So all these areas. So you can see the syllable program is in the Broca's area. Motor phoneme program is in the area 6. The somatic phoneme targets are in the angular gyrus. The syllable coordinate transforms are in the Wernicke's area, and motor program, that is the cerebellum connections, are also there, and the auditory targets are mainly in the superior temporal gyrus, angular gyrus, and inferior parietal lobule. All these are posterior heteromodal association areas. A very important diagram which keeps on coming us. So the speech production, let us understand, is a conceptual state. Like in the psycholinguistic model, the word doesn't have any phonological form or production nature. When a word is generated, it is projected to the highest cortical processing area, that is Broca's area, and the juncture of the parietal and temporal the motor plan, including the somatosensory area of parietal lobe 1, 2, 3, the motor strip of 4 and 6, the premotor cortex, and the cerebellum. The phonological representation occurs at both higher levels, Broca's TPJ loop, and the lower levels also, motor strip, somatosensory integration, and cerebellum simultaneously. So it's a very complex process, and this is really wonderful how does brain comprehend and produce language. No one really knows. We only know brain regions that are important to language skills, and the Wernicke Jesuit model of language was language processing was proposed. So you can see that it is incredibly complex, incredibly complex. The complexity of language is incredible. Humans can produce such a complex feat, and often with little thought behind how to do it. We just open mouth and the language usually flows out. So the language use is also known as pragmatics, how used with other human beings. So what I am doing is a monologue telling to you all. If it is a dialogue, it's a conversation. So this is how the language works. So the target is met auditorily. The output of those centers are what we mentioned, the TPJ and the cerebellum. There is the centers is not used as a feedback, but if an acoustic error is sensed, a correction is fed back to the TPJ and Broca's motor plane region. This is our learning process. Programs for phonemes that are created in the premotor region are sent to the cerebellum, and a prediction of resulting sensory states of articulation is created. So, what are the important areas? Supramarginal gyrus, the primary sensory cortex. They receive sensory output from resulting from articulation, and a mismatch between the prediction and production will result in a feedback to the cerebellum and premotor region for correction to take place. So it's a loop that goes on working relentlessly. So the model of Gunther, this is directions into velocities of articulation, which I will tell again. The model of speech production. This model uses sensory inputs as checks for the accuracy of the executed speech, feed forward, as well as sensory feedback to support the learning process in speech production. All these things aphasia. That's why I'm giving you the background of the speech. In this Diva model, the auditory model for the target phoneme, when it is sound, it is phoneme, when it is right, it is grapheme, is generated and conveyed to the auditory cortex and the somatosensory cortex, so that word that is produced can be validated against the target. When an error is detected, it will result in a correction in the following articulatory trial. So this circuit, which I've been showing again and again, is very important. The lemma here is ta ta ta, which you can see in this cartoon. The motor phoneme program turns the lemma into appropriate commands aimed at the intrinsic muscles of the tongue. The muscles of the tongue are here in this diagram. Open loop. The cerebellum runs its pre-programmed movement for the T over and over, and then the jaw opens. The cerebellum continues to move the tongue as before, but the no T is audible unless it is stimulated. So let's see the video of this connection, the loop systems, and how it connects. You can see that the loop that is going into the tongue, the cerebellum, this is the cortex, premotor cortex, and postcentral gyrus. All these things will go on. It's a loop system that goes on like this. The lemma is T. So the motor phoneme program and sensory feedback from the alveolus occurs now. When the tongue is making contact at the proper moment in the program, the afferent input matches the prediction. There is no need for adjustment at this. When the jaw opens, the somatic sensation changes. So there is a difference between the somatic phoneme target and the actual production. This difference gives negative feedback, error correction to the cerebellum, which then chooses a different coordinate transform program and alters the signals to the intrinsic muscles of the tongue until the error disappears. So this is a bit complex to understand, but students can understand that these different mechanisms are in operation, and which is a very complex mechanism, how the error correction takes place, and one after the other the syllables are produced. So the predicted output is ta ta ta. When the jaw moves, the received auditory pattern becomes ha. So there is a difference between the auditory phoneme target and the actual production. This difference gives feedback to the cerebellum, which then chooses a different coordinate transform program and alters the signals to the intrinsic muscle until the error disappears, as has already been told to you. This is a mechanism which involves the supplementary motor area, the parietal cortex, the cerebellum, and the tongue, and this loop activates. So this knowledge is very important for us. One of the hallmarks of this model was that it differentiated learning from learned execution of a motor act, specifying that learning stage requires much slower, more deliberate production based on the laborious integration of ongoing activity and the execution of the motor act. inherently slow because of the slow nature of the real-time sensory feedback. So with these complicated things, we'll go on to definition and components of language, which I have been telling. And language is a generative and a dynamic code, as I said in the beginning, containing universal characteristics whereby ideas about the world are expressed through a conventional system of arbitrary symbols for communication. That is the definition of language. It's a generative and a dynamic code containing universal characteristics whereby ideas about the world are expressed through a conventional system of arbitrary symbols for communication. You can see there are 8 characteristics. The code is there. The code is the language. The language is what we said, it's a code. And what does it represent? It represents ideas about the world. Words are used to represent the objects. In conversational means it is conventionally shared by community, and it has got a systematic way. It has got rules and regulations for how the code is applicable, learnable, and these are all arbors, and they are generative, they are dynamic, they got universal characteristics. So all these languages are generative means speakers are continuously creating novel utterances. The topics are same, but when I take this class again, the sentence will change. So that is the difference. So the dynamicism is this change in the dynamism, and all languages have nouns, verbs, adjectives, etc. These are the universal characteristics. So these are the 8 characteristics that are important in the language. And what are the contents and traits of the language? And importantly, the parts of the language are 3: content, form, and use. What is content? Content refers to word meaning. It is semantics. Dog, that meaning attached represents a furry domesticated animal which barks. That's how we understand that is the content. The form or the grammar refers to the shape and structure of the language. This involves sound structure, that is phonology, morphology, also word structure and syntax, the phrase and the sentence structure. These all 3 components cause the form. And the use is the language use is also known as pragmatics. How it is used with other human beings. That is the use. And it can be, as I said, monologue, as I am doing now. And if you're also talking, it becomes conversation and a dialogue. So that is sad, incredible complexity of the language, incredible how the brain gets all this. So let's look at some of these in greater detail. As I said, the 3 aspects of language: the semantics or content, the meaning of the language, the meaning of the words. Dog doesn't suggest anything else, but we know that it is a animal which has got a fur and barks and it's domesticated. The meaning of words in combination, the dog barks and like the cat cutes, now what elephant does, and all the other sounds which you can correlate with the animals. So what is a form? Also known as grammar. The shape or form of the language includes phonology, which is concerned with the study of phonemes, the smallest units in a language system. Last time in the Dysarthria class also we did. Morphology, concerned with the study of morphemes. The smallest units of meaning in a language is morpheme. The word is a morpheme. Syntax, how concerned with the structure of the sentences. Word order and sentences organization is syntax. So this is the form of the language. The third component is the use. Use also is known as pragmatics, the practical use of language. In what manner the language is used with others. In conversation, it is appropriate to take turns on the example of a pragmatic rule in language. So we have modalities of language reception, that is auditory comprehension and reading comprehension. Reading comprehension which you can see. You can show you that how we should do the reading comprehension and show you that the reading part, you have to have something to show like this. You have to read the letters, you have to read the shapes, you have to read and identify in a matching thing. So you should have some cards with you. You have to read the house and identify where it is. That means you are reading, you are interpreting, you are also applying that knowledge. So to identify, so visual say go, come, boy. Are you all there? Are you able to see?
Yes,
Yes,
sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So verbal formulation and written expression is one of the. So you have to test the writing also. Write the names of the objects. You show the objects so that the objects they have to write. So there are many objects which you can show and ask them to write and test. So this is also a important language. You have to see this, and the visual input takes place, and they correlate in the heteromonadal association area, and they will now have to verbal expression is reading. They have to read and tell what are the sentences which you have shown them, you have shown the colors, and you have shown them various objects and shapes and actions. So they have to show, they have to read, sleep, and to lift. So you show them various things like this. What are the actions they have to do? And they have to describe the read and describe. So these are important aspects of the language. The sentence comprehensions will come later. That is a syntax testing, which we are going to tell later. These are the expressions, the modalities of language expression, which we are trying to see. They have to. There are various colors that are shown. So language is a complicated issue, and they are mixed. And the important areas are the speech and language areas, as you can see, the Broca area, the inferior frontal gyrus, the supplementary motor area, the posterior parietal, and the superior temporal gyrus, and the Wernicke's area 41-42, and the angular gyrus, inferior parietal lobule. These are all the areas that are called the phonologically. These are the perisylvian areas. So what are the steps? What are the steps which the cochlea, this is the auditory input that comes to the analysis or process. So what it does, change of energy, which is acoustic energy, is transformed into a type of and the cochlear pathway fluid, what it does is then organ of Carti, the hair cells bend here and there. So chemical electrical signal is generated. So that signal is carried in the cranial nerve 8 to the thalamus. The thalamus to primary auditory cortex 41, 42, and surrounding the primary cortex is the Wernicke's area. That is the association area. And from Wernicke's area, then you can see the loops that are there. The Broca's area is connected where syntax is applied. So syntax is applied in the Broca's area. You can see the ear is supplying the chemical electrical signal is reaching the cochlear nucleus, it's going to the thalamus. From thalamus, it goes to the premotor cortex, and there are many other loops that are connecting. The arcuate fasciculus is connecting here. There is a pathway, the short pathways are connecting the Wernicke's area, the surrounding area. There is an inferior pathway, there's a ventral pathway, there's a dorsal pathway, which I'm going to describe in the next cartoon. And you can see these are the pathways of the language. And you can see the dorsal pathway, superior longitudinal fasciculus and arcuate fasciculus. That is one pathway. The second pathway is also here, and the ventral pathways are connected here, right? Uncinate fasciculus is connecting the frontal, the Broca's area here. And so these are the short loops. They're the short loops, there are long loops. So the whole thing is connected, intrinsically connected. That is the auditory. They got a visual system which is also conducting impulses. What you are seeing and observing, that vision, what are you seeing, which is tall, uh, which is short. So you have to give some idea to them, right? You can see that tall or short, the individual has to say the shapes. So the visual input is going on, and visual input, how it travels. And this is a diagram of the eye, and the optic nerve is here. Now these are three layers. Retina is extension of the brain. The choroid and the sclera. The choroid is extension of the matter. So you can see the visual fields are represented. The left visual field, the right visual field, both eyes have a hold on the visual field. The left visual field is by the nasal part of the retina, and the nasal part of the retina also supplies this, and the temporal visual field, the right visual field is a temporal. So there is a crisscross, but the nasal, temporal, field function, the both fields, and both the fields are captured by the optic nerves. Shall we continue? There's a break in between. Are you all there?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay, sorry. Because there is a connection problem here, and which I think got sorted out by itself. I don't know how long it's going to be there. So from the eyes to the lateral geniculate nucleus of thalamus via optic tracts, the visual cortex we can and via geniculocalcarine tract, visual areas to ventral and dorsal streams of the vision. So the calcarine cortex is the center for the vision. Surrounding that is called the unimodal percepts of vision are generated. You can see the posterior part of the brain has a vision, as auditory cortex close by, somatosensory. So all these three modalities, they integrate their for processing of information, that is called posterior heteromodal association areas. So for reading, three other cortical areas are also involved, that is parieto-temporal system, where decoding of semantics and word analysis takes place. Occipito-temporal system, where word form recognition, sight reading. Anterior reading system, where decoding of syntax, that is the Broca's area, low frequency words, silent reading, all these things are anterior reading system. So writing and reading are important aspects of language. Yeah, there are two streams. One stream that is a ventral stream, which addresses the question what, and one is a dorsal stream, which is the where question is answered. So you can see that this is the striate cortex. There are two streams which are going. One is going from down. This is a ventral stream. It goes to fusiform gyrus also, where face recognition is important. You can see the visual information, the auditory information. These are all the areas. This is called the posterior heteromodal association area, where you can see the sensory somatosensory integration, the visual integration, the auditory integration. On the left side, if this area is damaged, there will be chaos. This is anterior reading system, which you can see here. That is where the syntax is formed in the Broca's area. Parieto-temporal reading system, which you can see here, that is the posterior heteromodal association area, where you have to generate this concept. Occipito-temporal reading system is shown here. This is the ventral stream, this is the dorsal stream, this is the anterior stream. So these are the reading areas that are important for the language. So the decision to speak formed in the prefrontal cortex. The decision is sent to the Broca's area for language encoding and speech planning. The speech plans are sent to the supplementary motor area, which activates the plans, and which in turn sends to motor cortex, which sends activated plans to the speech muscles, that are the labials, the linguals, the guttural sounds production by the lips, the tongue, and the pharyngeal group of muscles supplied by cranial nerve 7 coming from the premotor cortex. So there are areas of prefrontal cortex where the idea is generated, that is sent to the Broca's area, which goes to the supplementary motor area. From there, the premotor cortex, and from there it comes down to the articulatory mechanism. So that's the loop of oral production of the language, which is very important to understand. Okay, so the decision to write is formed in prefrontal cortex as well. Then decision is sent to Broca's area for language encoding. Writing plans sent to premotor area, which forms grapheme motor plans. I said grapheme is a written word or written unit. Phoneme is a auditory unit. The premotor area sends to motor cortex, which sends plans to hand muscles. Areas 5 and 7 aid visual spatial elements of writing. So you can see it's all network connected. Any disruption in the network can damage our this thing. And you can see the network of writing, how the writing is done, and the prefrontal cortex to Broca's area, where encoding of syntax, etc., is taking place, goes to premotor area and pre-central cortex, and from this is an area of post-central chatters and sensory areas of 5 and 7, which will finally help in writing. So you can see the network. The network can be right. Aphasia now, an acquired multimodality language disorder. It's caused by stroke, brain injury, etc. Problem in multiple language modalities: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The language, the symbolic code we used to communicate is language, as I said earlier, and language system does not function as it should in the disorders of aphasia. So expressive language problems, the symptoms of aphasia include agrammatism, anomia, jargon, neologisms, paraphasias, literal, verbal stereotypes, agraphias. The receptive language problems are auditory comprehension loss and Alexia, that is failure to read. So the fluent versus non-fluent aphasia. Fluent aphasia is the Wernicke's aphasia. Non-fluent is Broca's aphasia. The articulation is affected in non-fluent, but it is normal in fluent. The effortful labored speech is in Broca's aphasia, normal in fluent aphasia. The quality of words is sparse in non-fluent or Broca's, and it is normal in fluent. The words per minute less than 100 in non-fluent, per minute more than 100 to 200 in fluent one. Phrase length is very short in Broca's, that 1 to 2 words only, but phrase length is very long in fluent aphasia, 5 to 8. The prosody, the timbre, the quantity that is given to the language is impaired in non-fluent aphasia, and they appear normal in Wernicke's. The content is excessive content words, but few functional words. They convey the meaning, but there is lack of content in Wernicke's, and lots of function words are used. So that these are the main differences between these two. So in language assessment, first you concentrate on spontaneous speech output production, verbal comprehension, visual comprehension, repetition, reading, writing, naming. All these aspects are to be tested correctly. And aphasia anomia, does the patient know the word production anomia? The labored speech due to motor issues, Broca's aphasia, or apraxia of speech, which happens in the Broca's area. Every time the patient use a word in another modality, writing. It's some word selection anomia. That is, does the patient know the word? Yes, but no, he cannot produce the word in the writing because the tip of the tongue phenomena. This is called true anomia. Semantic anomia, does the patient know the word? No, he cannot write. Semantic field is lost. There is no response from the patient, usually accompanied by poor auditory comprehension. So comprehension problems are mainly seen in the posterior or fluent aphasia. Though paraphasias, how many types you have? You have got a lexical, that is real words, and non-lexical, non-words. So you can, paraphasia can be divided into semantic, formal, mixed, unrelated. What is semantic is word related to target in meaning, like a cat is pronounced as dog. Word is related to target in sound, cat, mat. Word with sound and meaning relationships, cat, rat. Word with no apparent relation to target, cat and bucket. So these are the targets and the errors that are seen. These are called paraphasic errors of lexical nature. Phonemic errors, non-word obviously related in sound, cat, jat. Neologistic, non-word with no apparent relationship, cat can be repoko. So these are the various types of paraphasias which you can come across. Classical aphasia, as I said, non-fluent and fluent. How will you differentiate? The most important test is repetition. The repetition is important to understand. First, non-fluent and fluent will discuss. Comprehension is an important aspect, where comprehension is preserved in Broca's, and auditory comprehension is preserved in Broca's aphasia. whereas in Wernicke's it is lost. Fluency is preserved in the Wernicke's and it is lost in Broca's. Fluency is also lost in transcortical motor and mixed transcortical and global. And Wernicke's non-fluent aphasias also, there will be no loss in fluency, there is no loss in transcortical sensory aphasia, the fluency is not lost in conduction, they are not lost in anomic aphasia. The comprehension problems are mainly in the Wernicke's group and conduction, anomic, result. Now you see the repetition. Repetition is made. The conduction aphasia, the repetition is lost, whereas fluency and auditory, the problem is an arcuate fasciculus here. So the to understand is the comprehension you have to test. Yes, if it is comprehension is yes, then repetition you test. Repetition, yes, it is transcortical motor aphasia. Repetition is not yes or an impaired Broca's aphasia. If comprehends no, repeats no, global aphasia. Repeats yes, mixed transcortical motor aphasia. Comprehension is fluent. Fluency is fluent. Comprehension is not there. Aphasia, but comprehension without repetition cause are isolated from Broca's area. Transcortical sensory surrounding areas of Wernicke's are isolated from the Wernicke's area when you get transcortical sensory aphasia. The Broca's is related to transcortical motor and mixed. Similarly, the Wernicke's area is the sensory. Conduction aphasia has been disturbance in the arcuate fasciculus, which is very rare, and same thing also in anomic aphasia. And so these are the main groups of aphasia which you see, and you can see the various areas of the brain that are involved in the Broca's aphasia. You can see Broca's aphasia can be seen in these areas. And the sites of visions of transcortical motor aphasia, that is the surrounding area of the Broca's. This is the lateral fissure. This is the precentral gyrus. This is the supplementary motor area, and this is the postcentral gyrus, the central sulcus. This is the transcortical motor aphasia. The mixed transcortical aphasia, the damage in the watershed areas you can see, and global aphasia you can see the how much the area is involved. In this, and transcortical aphasia is angular gyrus and the inferior occipital gyrus and inferior parietal gyrus. These are the areas which are, this is mainly the posterior heteromolar association areas here. The conduction aphasia, as I said, is the connection between the Broca's and the Wernicke's, that is arcuate fasciculus, that is involved in conduction aphasia. Anomic aphasia is all the posterior heteromodal association problems where the lesion is involving inferior parietal gyrus, supramarginal gyrus, and angular gyrus. See, these are the areas which are causing anomic aphasia. So, otherwise, reading problems are known as Alexia, which is an acquired disorder of reading. There is a peripheral Alexia, reading difficulty due to visuospatial and attentional issues. Central Alexia reading system is damaged in this area. So the dual root reading model, written word, example, you can say dog, visual feature analysis, and the letter analysis, and semantic system, lexical, non-semantic, grapheme, phoneme conversation. Finally, you will say, read this. So this is a complex type peripheral Alexia, and central Alexia, peripheral Alexia, subtypes are pure Alexia, sight reading impaired, visual feature analysis and letter analysis, which we have said neglect, left or the right visual feature the cortex, occipital cortex lesions, attention and visual letter to syllable substitution, the phonology
Sir, you are Sir, you are on mute.
just now. Okay, I'm so sorry for that. Did you see the previous slides? The types of agraphia. Type Alexa, then I'll cover it in the next class, some of these aspects. Okay,
Yes, sir.
right. So I think let us put a stop here. And any questions if you want to ask? The last part I'll cover in the next class also. Okay. So this
Yes,
is a
sir.
neuro, right then. If there are no questions, all of you read, and anytime you can come and ask me. Okay. Right then. Have a good day. I have to go
Thank
for
you,
my
sir.